some of the malformations of the American left ideologically. She also served as a speechwriter for a very great lady named Nancy Reagan, Mona Charen. David Horowitz has the wonderful advantage of being local, and that's after he escaped from the People's Republic of Berkeley, where at one time he was a fixture of the Berkeley left as editor of Ramparts magazine. David is the author. He's come a long way, baby. David is the author of 3,423 major books, or so it seems. He makes all the rest of us look like slackers because he turns out new books all the time, from his best-selling biographies of the Fords and of the Rockefellers to his very controversial book, Unholy Alliance, about the very unlikely alliance of the American left and Islamo-Nazi fascists, to his most recent book, which is called Reforming Our Universities, which has been a major project of his. By the way, if you tune in to KRLA this coming Friday, which happens to be the second day of another Jewish holiday, but we have pre-taped a session with David Horowitz taking on one of the most left-wing academics in the country, Robert Jensen of the University of Texas. That'll be broadcast this Friday between noon and 3 on KRLA AM 870. David Horowitz. Cliff May is the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He is a veteran journalist who has been both an editor and a correspondent for, believe it or not, the New York Times and many other prestigious publications. Cliff has been a special advisor to the State Department on issues of spreading democracy around the world. He reported directly to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and his columns appear regularly in venues ranging from National Review Online to the American Spectator and many, many others. Cliff May. All right, what we're going to try to do here is go around quickly with quick responses from all of the panelists to 2 rounds of questions, and then we're going to try to open it up to the audience because given the fact that this is a Jewish Policy Center event, in our past events we have found that very often people are not shy about either their opinions or their questions, and we do want you to be able to participate as much as possible. First question, I want to ask this of each of the panelists in turn, and then we'll go on from there. The title for tonight's occasion is Securing America's Future. David Horowitz, what is the most serious threat in this September 26th, 2010, to the future of this great republic?
Wow. Well, the threat is from the Unholy Alliance. We're facing probably the most.
If you can speak into them.
Probably the most serious threat in our history from. I think Michael's right in calling it Islamo-Nazism, which comes in 2 forms. One is the overt terrorist threat, and the other is a 5th column threat within the Western countries from Islamists who are determined to destroy Western civilization. And this is probably the more serious of the 2 threats. And you can see how they work in tandem. Well, with the recent, the little preacher in Florida who wanted to burn a Charen, America is so terrified of the Islamo-Nazis that the President, the Secretary of Defense, the head of our troops, all came down on his head. I don't think what he did was too smart, but to forestall what? A threat of an attack. Appeasement is the mentality now in Washington and throughout our culture. And what makes this threat, the Islamo-fascist or Islamo-Nazi threat, so serious is that it is part of it is supported by the international left and the American left. America is guilty before it does anything. Mark Stein had an interesting post on his website today, which he pointed out that when he went to Guantanamo, in each cell there's a brand new Charen for these terrorists, and it's encased, it comes to them in plastics so that it's not defiled by the infidels, which is us. And so these infidels, at least the ones that represent us in Washington and through them in our military, accept the indictment or accept the point of view of these terrorists, that we're unclean and we can't, if we handle the Quran, we defile it. So there's, to me, this is the most serious crisis in the West, is its lack of a will to defend itself, to stand up for itself.
Serious threat to the future of the Republic.
Well, I would add to what David has said, because I do agree that this civilizational self-confidence, if you will, is a problem for the West in general. But I think that the question we are now faced with is, we know that Europe is gone. Europe has lost self-confidence. Europe is awash in self-blame, trying to make amends for their imagined sins over the centuries. And of course they committed some, but then who hasn't? But they have given up the idea that Western civilization is something that ought to be defended, although there are pockets of revival that you see, the French banning the burqa and so on. But the question for us is, where does the United States stand? Throughout the post-war period, the United States was the country that said, we still believe in Western civilization and we still believe in the uniqueness of the American experiment in ordered liberty. We have not given up. And so we are now faced with a party in power that would like to Europeanize the United States and make us much more like the socialist economies of Europe, which also means a very significantly reduced international role for the United States. And those who are protesting against this and saying, no, we still believe in American ideals, we still believe in American exceptionalism, and we still believe that America has a role in defending Western civilization. So those are the stakes. And that, I think, is the great question that will be resolved in the next 2 elections.
Well, I certainly agree with my colleagues. It is what I prefer to call the war against the West. The democratic experiment historically is rather young. In the 20th century, it came under attack by regimes, by movements, by ideologies that were supremacists, that were anti-democratic, that were virulently anti-Semitic. Today, the democratic experiment is again under attack, once again by regimes, ideologies, and movements that are supremacists, that are anti-democratic, and virulently anti-Semitic. Particularly for this audience, let me point out what I think you know, and that is that Israel is on the front lines of this war. They are out there on the point of the spear. And it's very important to understand when you have Ahmadinejad and Khamenei developing nuclear weapons, denying the Holocaust, threatening to wipe Israel off the map, threatening that a world without America is attainable, and putting death to America on their missiles. When you have Ahmadinejad coming to New York and to the applause of many nations saying, who knows, 9/11, probably the U.S. government was involved, we have a dangerous situation. The Holocaust, my friends, was not a childhood disease. Having experienced it gives the Jewish people no immunity. This is a very dangerous time to live in.
Let me add a somewhat different perspective, and I wasn't planning to do this except for the fact that the perspective hasn't been presented. I actually believe the most serious threat to the Republic can be summed up in a single word, and the word is bankruptcy. We are in a situation in California, God knows, and in Washington, D.C., where there is no conceivable way, without the most extreme reorientation of our entire governmental system, that our governments can pay the obligations they have already undertaken. We are broke, we are busted, we are spending too much, the government has grown too large, and it is without question a dire threat to the very existence of liberty and to the American way of life. What is most essential to the American way of life? The most essential element of the American dream. And it's what brought my grandparents here from Germany in 1934 on my mother's side and from Ukraine in 1910 on my father's side. What is essential to the American dream is the idea that we pass on a life to our children that is better than the life that we're leading. When we have a majority of Americans who don't have that expectation any longer, it is in part because of the irresponsibility of a governing class that is deeply out of touch with the Republic and has created a desperately, desperately dangerous situation. And by the way, it is a situation which threatens our ability to address the threats of Islamo-Nazism that my colleagues highlighted. Because without a government that is sustainable and fundable, you can't fund the military or anything else. Let's proceed, if I can, to a